Hi guys, today we're going to talk about the alternatives to Athenaze. Remember to check the description for links to the books mentioned on the video. The first book we're going to talk about is the famous Polis. As far as I've heard, at least one more volume should appear, but until then it's only the first volume plus the teacher's book. I only have the older German version, but it's practically the same as the current English one. A detailed review would be too long, so I'll just make a brief comparison to the Athenaze series, the Italian one of course. I'd say that Polis is more of a complement than an alternative to Athenaze as of right now, simply because Athenaze is a complete course into very big volumes, and Polis so far has only one volume plus the teacher's book, and doesn't cover the whole grammar and syntax spectrum as of yet. But it has the incredible advantage of being very intuitive, abundant with drawings, and is focused on speaking, so you'll learn from the very beginning how to say useful everyday stuff. Unlike with Athenaze, which is focused on reading. Another difference is the organization. Athenaze is far more conservative and presents the grammar topics according to typical Western tradition. First declensions, then conjugations, then contract forms, then participles, and so on. Polis is more innovative and presents first the forms that are traditionally considered to be more difficult, like the imperative aorist, the verbs in me, irregular verbs, and so on. It makes sense, since those are things that occur frequently in everyday speech, and the method is focused precisely on that. Also, it's filled with dialogues for the very same reason. If I had to name two advantages over Athenaze, it would be that 1, it's almost 100% monolingual, meaning that everything, even the grammar explanations, are in Greek. 2, it has an appendix containing the ancient Greek terminology for grammar, that is how to say adjective, verb, how to say nominative, accusative, masculine, feminine, how to say accent, spirit, all of those things that both the teacher and student should know to successfully have a class of Greek in Greek, which is the ideal pedagogical setting that this book proposes. I get that it could be difficult to adapt to a self-learning environment, but it's definitely possible. Now, I hear a lot of complaints about it being focused on Koine Greek instead of Attic Greek, but I think they are totally unjustified. First, because they stem from the prejudice that Koine Greek is equivalent to Biblical Greek, which is completely false. Koine Greek is everything from roughly Alexander until the Byzantine Empire. That's at least some 600 years of literature that happen to include the Septuagint and the New Testament, but those are just a very small fraction of Koine. I really don't understand the scandal of teaching the student the form Díscolos instead of Halepos, or teaching Phronimos instead of Sophos. Those are the only notable difference that you'll find in Polis. It's like complaining because an English book teaches cookie instead of biscuit, or apartment instead of flat. It's ridiculous, I think. Yes, there are some differences between Koine and Attic, particularly in the verb forms, like the lack of optative, for example, but really they are no more complex than, for example, in Spanish, the variation of vos sos, tú eres, usted es, for you are. In fact, the Aeolic dialect of Sappho and Alcaeus, or the Doric choral lyric, are far more difficult and different to Attic than Koine. Learning it will not in any way whatsoever hinder or delay your understanding of Attic Greek. It would only help. Besides, Koine literature happens to be more abundant and easier for students than pure classical Attic, so there's even a pedagogical advantage of starting with that. The second alternative to Athenaze is the famous Reading Greek of the Joint Association of Classical Teachers. On paper, it might seem like the perfect course. It has its main book, a CD recording, a book with the grammar and exercises, an independent study guide for self-learners, which includes everything translated and an answer key. And it even has its companion volume, The World of Athens, which is an introduction to history, culture, and daily life of Athens. But the reality is a bit more disappointing. The recordings are horrible and barely understandable. It's one of the most unfortunate attempts there are of a reconstructed pronunciation. It's so bad that it seems they fail on purpose. The exercises are equally horrible, and there's very few of them. Basically a few questions per chapter, you're supposed to conjugate and decline, and make some translations, and that's it. The worst part are probably the exercises. They put you to conjugate verbs and decline nouns that you have not yet seen and whose meaning you don't know. It's pure and hard grammar translation approach here. Both Athenaze and Polis, even when they ask you to conjugate and sometimes translate, It's always something that you have previously encountered and whose meaning you already know, or something you can reasonably deduce from what you already know. So if you decide to acquire reading Greek, I strongly discourage you from using its exercises. But not everything is bad. Reading Greek has the one excellent virtue of the quality of the Greek text. There are 2 editions, I'm going to focus on the first one. The only difference is that the second edition now includes the vocabulary as footnotes in the first volume, and it's a bit bigger, but everything else is the same. Reading Greek is very similar to Athenaze in that it presents a graded story, loosely based on the life of Mr. Polis, but it focuses on other historical or literary events taken from Thucydides, Plato, Demosthenes, and many others. It's a very thin book. You get exactly 181 pages of Greek text, minus 2 or 3 English paragraphs per chapter. The stories are excellent and incredibly entertaining. In this aspect, it's very superior to Athenaze, that can be at times monotonous, and also in the fact that reading Greek has a lot of dialogues. And like I said, the literary quality of the Greek is superb. But these qualities can also be a disadvantage, especially for beginners. You see, reading Greek presents more varied stories and more vocabulary, and it's not repetitive at all, but that's precisely what makes it extremely difficult if you're starting from zero. Since you may encounter new vocabulary that's not present in subsequent chapters, and that's most definitely not reviewed in the exercises, the whole Greek grammar and syntax that Athenaze gives you little by little in the span of 2 volumes, or more than 1,000 pages, reading Greek forces on just 181. To name some examples, just in part 1 of reading Greek, that is pages 1 to 21, you find in page 11 the middle voice. In Athenaze you see that in page 112. In page 9 you find the verb ida or oida. In Athenaze you find that in page 424 of the second volume. In page 16 the contract verbs in omicron omega, whereas in Athenaze they appear from page 327 onwards. I'm not gonna make a detailed comparison, suffice to say that just that first part of reading Greek, that is 21 pages, contains almost all the grammar that Athenaze gives you in 8 chapters or 207 pages. I don't know, I guess that if you are really in a hurry, or you happen to have a very good memory, reading Greek would do the trick alone, but I really don't see how a beginner would have an easy time. Also, unlike Athenaze and Polis, reading Greek makes no use of images to clarify or explain the text or introduce vocabulary. They're just an ornament. Of course, if you already learned Greek and you just want to relearn or review everything from scratch, then reading Greek is your first choice. That said, I cannot emphasize enough the excellent quality of the Greek and the interesting stories. They are really an excellent companion, and they are worth their weight in gold. I personally use it as a reviewer, having gone through Athenaze once, and having no desire to go through the first volume again. It serves as an excellent reading material and grammar reviewer, especially the first edition, which is very comfortable and easy to carry. In summary, every characteristic of the 2 methods I've just described could be considered an advantage or a disadvantage compared to Athenaze, depending on your perspective and your needs. If you are very intelligent and disciplined, Athenaze might be boring for you because of its repetitiveness and the slow pace in introducing new grammar subjects. If you don't have a good memory or you cannot dedicate much time to study and review, then reading Greek will do you no good, I think. If you are not interested in speaking Greek or you have something against koine, then Polis might not be the best tool for you. I hope these descriptions are enough for you to get an idea of what method best fits your learning strategies, habits, and personality. Don't let my reticence and misgivings stop you from trying something that you feel it can work for you. I'll see you next time to review other Greek methods that can substitute or complement Athenaze.